today's episode, we talk about the maze of regulations landlords have to follow, how to handle rent arrears and evictions, and the uncertainty of the Renters Reform Bill, with our special guest, solicitor and managing director of Landlord Law, Tessa Shepperson. So, before we get started talking about all the challenges facing landlords at this current moment in time, I want to go back a little bit in time if I can and ask how your legal career got started, and also if you could just explain to our viewers a little bit more about landlord law and how it all came about, really.
Yeah, sure. Well, it was quite a circuitous route, really, because I originally geography was my subject at school, and I did a geography degree, and I was going to be a geography teacher, and I did teacher training, and then it dawned on me that I wasn't actually very good at teaching 13-year-olds who didn't want to learn geography. So I sort of stopped the teacher training because I realised it wasn't for me, and I wasn't able to get a job because I didn't have any marketable skills. So I went to secretarial college and thought, well, at least I'll be able to get a job as a secretary, if nothing else. And there they had a law paper. And I realized that I really, really enjoyed law. So I came back down to London and stayed with my parents for a while. And I started studying for the London External Law degree, which took me 5 years. And then I went and did the solicitor's final exams and then qualified eventually. I did my articles, as we called it then, in a really nice firm in Norwich called Cousins Hardy. So that's how I qualified as a lawyer. So it's a little bit unusual because I sort of batted about a bit. But yeah, I worked as an assistant solicitor at Cousins Hardy for, I think it was about could have been nearly 6 years. I'm not sure exactly. And then I decided to set up my own business and set up as a sole practitioner, which was a bit of a leap of faith, but I managed it, and I found I really enjoyed the business side of running a business, as well as the legal practice. And then the internet came along, because this was in the 1990s when the internet was in its infancy. And I was absolutely fascinated by the fact that there was this thing called the internet where computers could talk to each other through telephone lines. I was absolutely fascinated by it. Most people thought I was mad. And I set up my own website. And I gradually became aware that a lot of landlords really didn't know what their legal rights and obligations were. And they didn't really want to put on a suit and go and see a solicitor. So, they sort of made mistakes, and there wasn't really an easy way for them to find out at that stage. So I got the idea of setting up a website where people could go to find out. And I thought, well, if I charged a fee, then this would justify my time in developing it and keeping it up to date. And that's how Landlord Law was born. And I didn't realize at that stage that I was setting up a membership subscription site, because nobody knew about them. It was right at the beginning. This was 2001, right at the beginning of the sort of internet stage. But Landlord Law was really successful. People really liked it. And I added more and more. I added tenancy agreements. I added a forum where I answer questions. I added an eviction guide. And then in 2013, the website was doing so well, I thought, well, why am I running a solicitor's practice? Because most of my income and my work is through the website. So I closed my law firm down. And although I'm still a regulated solicitor, Landlord Law itself, which is my business, is not regulated by the Solicitors Regulation Authority, although I am personally. But yeah, it's been great, and it's been great fun running it. And we do training as well, so it's sort of there to help landlords. So it's been great fun. I've really enjoyed doing it. It's been a fun project.
It does. It sounds like an amazing project. And that's amazing to hear as well how your legal career got started, obviously, as sort of you were starting in geography, and how
Yeah.
landlord law has grown and grown since then. And it's become such a helpful tool for landlords. And one of the questions I really wanted to ask you about was, I just don't think people realize how many rules and regulations landlords have to follow. And I mean,
Mm.
is there actually a figure? I mean, how many pieces of legislation do landlords have to follow?
Well, I think the answer to that is I don't know. There are a lot, but it sort of depends, I suppose, on how you categorize it. I mean, I haven't really sat down and totted them up. I just
Mm.
provide guidance for everything that I can think of that landlords need to know about. I mean, on Landlord Law, we do have a legislation page, and I provide links to 24 statutes and 26 statutory instruments, but those are the ones that I've listed there. There are others. I mean, some people say there's 150, some people say they're 400. I see they never actually list them, so we can't go and count them.
Mm.
But there is a lot. And I think it's really important that landlords do have some training and don't go into being a landlord without training, because failure to comply with some of these regulations can prove very expensive. And there's all sorts of unpleasant things that can happen to you if you don't. So it is a good idea either to use a really good letting agent, or to be a member of something like Landlord Law that will hold your hand and will help you comply with it. I mean, just
Ex-
one of the things that we've got on Landlord Law that is helpful for people, it's something I did quite recently, don't know why I didn't think about it before actually, is that I've got an audit kit. So it's a kit for landlords. They can go through the kit section by section and just check that they are compliant with the main rules and regulations that apply. And it's a sort of process that landlords can perhaps do once a year, or perhaps when they get their property back, just to reassure themselves and check that they are complying with things. Because it's easy for things to be missed. You know, I mean, if you take a deposit and there's lots of things going on, you may forget to protect it, and you may not realize you haven't protected it, you know, that sort of thing. So if there's a procedure that you can go through every now and again to pick these things up, then that's quite a good idea. So that's one of the benefits of Landlord Law membership. You get access to the audit kit, but there are others.
No, I know that would be really, really helpful for landlords, definitely with that audit kit. And I mean, there are so many different types of tenancy agreements, and sometimes landlords may be struggling to find the right one for them. Could you just explain to us, I mean, what are the common types of tenancy agreements? And of course, how landlord law can help with tenancy agreements too?
Well, it depends on the tenancy type. You need to have the right tenancy agreement for the tenancy type. So if you've got a company let, you need to have a tenancy agreement for a company let. If you've got an assured short hold tenancy, you need to have one suitable for an assured short hold tenancy. But most tenancies are, at the moment, assured short hold tenancies. So I think I'd probably say for that, probably the most important thing is that the tenancy agreement should be fairly recent. Because, I mean, we've got tenancy agreements at Landlord Law, and I update them fairly frequently when there's a legal change, so that the tenancy agreement complies with the various rules. I mean, for example, if you download a free agreement from the internet, you know, you've got no guarantee that that complies with all the legislation. And it's also important, your tenancy agreement can do a lot to protect you if you are a landlord. I mean, for example, one thing that a tenancy agreement can do, I mean, you probably know that landlords in England have to check the tenant's right to rent, and that the fines have gone up horrendously this year. So it's a real risk for landlords, and they have to make sure that they do that. Well, your tenancy agreement can protect you, because what you can do is you can list everybody who's entitled to live at the property, like the tenants, and then all the permitted occupiers. And then you can make sure that you've right to rent checked them and you've got a record of it. And then you can say in your tenancy agreement, they're not allowed to let anybody live there. So if they let someone else live there, they're in breach of the terms of their tenancy agreement. So if the Home Office come on down on you and say, look, you've got these people living there who are not, who don't have a right to rent, you can say, well, look, it's not my fault. I've limited who should be there. I've right to rent checked everybody who's there, and they've all got a right to rent. So it's the tenants are in breach of the tenancy agreement by allowing them to live there, and hopefully that should protect you. That's just one of the things that a good tenancy agreement can do to protect your position as a landlord.
Exactly, exactly. And I think that's really, really helpful what you were saying there. I know a lot of landlords will find that really helpful. And one of the other questions I really wanted to ask you is about as well was from your line of work as a solicitor, what are some of the common pitfalls that landlords encounter when managing their properties, would you say?
I think probably the worst thing is not checking the tenants properly, because I think most landlords will agree that probably the number one important thing is to have decent tenants, good tenants, tenants who are going to pay, tenants who will behave responsibly in your property. That is so, so important, because if you haven't got good tenants, then, it's going to be really difficult for you as a landlord. So that's really important. I mean, giving a sort of out-of-date tenancy agreement is another problem. Not doing inspections is also another problem, and this is one that I think landlords often drop into, because the problem about inspections is nobody really likes doing them. The landlords feel that they're imposing and intruding on their tenants and feel embarrassed about it, and the tenants don't like someone coming around and poking around their home. So it's quite understandable that they're sort of unpopular all round. But from the landlord's point of view, it is really, really important that you do the inspections, because that's when you pick up on things that could be wrong. For example, if your tenants have got unauthorized occupiers living there, that might make your property turn it into an HMO, and it may even turn it into a licensable HMO, which could, if the local authority find out about it, they could prosecute you. So, that's one thing. Another thing is that your tenants may be using the property for some sort of illegal post, like they could have turned it into a cannabis farm, or without going to the length of turning it into a cannabis farm, they could just be growing cannabis in the wardrobes or in the loft, which could also cause you problem, because if you've knowingly turned a blind eye to that sort of thing, you can be vulnerable to being prosecuted yourself under the drugs legislation. And just picking up on repairs, because with a repair, if you do it quickly, it's not going to cost you very much, but if you leave it for a long time, it could turn into something that's really expensive. So that's another reason why it's really, really important to do regular inspections. And I say the starting point really is every 3 months. Now, another reason why you want to do inspections is that it's increasingly a requirement of many insurance companies. They will want, as a condition of the insurance, they will want the landlord to do regular inspections, because also it affects, the liability of the insurance company. They're not going to want to pay the very expensive damage that converting a property to a cannabis farm will do if the landlord hasn't checked the tenants properly and they've never gone around and looked at it in the 3 years that they've been there. So that's entirely understandable. So I think not carrying out inspections, failing to recognize that you have an HMO anyway, even without illegal people being there, I mean, if a lot of landlords just don't realize that their property is an HMO and is subject to the HMO rules. And that can cause problems. And if you don't get an HMO license, another thing is your tenants can make an application for a rent repayment order, and that can be very expensive. So that's another problem. So those are just a few of the things that landlords make mistakes. And of course, getting the audit kit gives you some sort of protection, because you can just check every now and again that you've complied with these things, because those are things that we talk about in the audit kit.
That's really interesting to hear, actually, sort of all the sort of common legal pitfalls, I suppose, that you do
Yeah,
see. And I mean, tenant inspection, sorry, I think is a big, big sort of
yeah.
topic with that. As you were saying, sort of about the insurance companies as well, is that they want to, as you were saying, 3 months, 6 months inspection sort of thing, isn't it?
I mean, the period of the inspection really depends on the circumstances. I think 3 months should be your starting point. If you've got really good tenants who've been there for a very long time and are absolutely reliable, 6-month inspections, or perhaps, even a year, if they're really reliable. For some HMOs, landlords will go around there every week. So it very much depends on the property, but I think 3 months is the starting point. I should perhaps mention also that we do have a kit for doing inspections, which I did a few years ago. And it was quite fun doing it. And one of the things that I did, I launched it as a beta product, and I sold it fairly cheaply to landlords on the basis that they gave me feedback. And I have to say, I had the most fantastic feedback from landlords. It was brilliant. I had so much, I couldn't really use all of it because there was so much. So the inspection kit has been heavily amended to take account of all the landlord feedback. So it should be quite good. And it is one of our most popular products. It is available to some Landlord Law members as part of their membership. But if not, you can buy it. Lots of people have, and it's a useful thing to do. We do have quite a few kits that are available. Some of them are included with Landlord Law membership, some of them aren't. But I quite enjoy doing them, writing them and researching them.
That sounds great. And that will definitely be such, again, a really, really helpful resource for landlords, I'm sure. And I'm sure one of the biggest problems we hear about on Property 118, and I'm sure you hear about it a lot too, is rent arrears. Now,
Yeah.
how can landlords deal with rent arrears quickly and, of course, minimize the loss as well?
Well, I think probably the most important thing is to check that tenants are paying, because you're more likely to resolve it if you jump on it immediately. So either use a service that will tell you if the tenant hasn't paid, and there are services that will send you a message if that doesn't happen, or just go and check your bank account on the rent payment day. And then if they haven't paid, get in touch with them. Now, it won't always be because the tenants don't want to pay. Sometimes it may be a genuine error. And I have known sometimes the banks make mistakes, and, you know, there's a problem. And they will be really grateful to you for letting them know, because most tenants won't want their rent arrears to mount up. So your first letter to the tenant should be on the basis that, you know, I don't know whether you realize this, but, you know, your rent hasn't gone through. You know, could you pay it? And then you can send a series of letters of sort of increasing severity, and then eventually serve a notice if they don't deal with it. But I think if you deal with it immediately, and also the fact that tenants know that you are monitoring this and that you will get in touch if they don't pay, that's going to incentivize them not to let it happen, because they won't want their landlord getting in touch with them about the rent arrears. Whereas if you just ignore it and let it drift, they're going to think, oh well, you know, landlord doesn't care, I'm not going to pay anyway, and it'll just get worse. So I think that's the key thing. I mean, one of the things that we have on Landlord Law, which I actually wrote, God, I originally wrote it a long time ago. I call it the Rent Arrears Action Plan, and it's a section of Landlord Law where I've got 4 sections, and the first section is what to do immediately the tenant falls into arrears, and I say what I've just said, and we've got some letters that people can send. And then the next stage is about the notices that you can serve. I'm probably going to have to amend that heavily if the Renters Reform Bill comes in. And then there's a section about proceedings, and then there's another section, section 4, is about just getting a county court judgment without possession. So that's quite a useful resource that we have on Landlord Law, particularly the first stage, because that goes for, and there's a number of things that you can do. I mean, another thing that you can do, I mean, we have a cost of living crisis at the moment, and many tenants are genuinely finding it really hard. But there are a number of things that you can do as a landlord to help. I mean, you can help them check their benefit, for example. They may not realize that they're entitled to benefit. You can help them, if you're on good terms with them, you know, you can help them deal with their finances, because they may not be managing their finances in an optimal way. And also, it's not often realized, there are a lot of organizations that will make grants to tenants to help them with their rent arrears. For example, if someone's been in the army, there's a couple of organizations and charities that will make a grant to support people who've been in the military. If they're children, it may be that Save the Children would help and make a grant. So there are a lot of organizations that will help if you approach them in the right way. And another kit that we have on Landlord Law. This one I did with a lady called Julie, and it's a kit about helping tenants in arrears, and it sort of goes through all the things that you can do, the things that you can discuss with them, and the various resources that you can use to help tenants pay. And that's a really nice thing to do, because if the tenants genuinely can't afford and they're genuinely in financial difficulties and you're able to help them, then hopefully they're going to be grateful to you, and they'll stay a long time, which is what landlords want. They want tenants staying a long time with no voids. So it is a really good thing. It also might be useful for letting agents as well, if they've got problems with lots of landlords whose tenants are in arrears. It sort of gives them a guide to follow. So that's another useful one of our kits. That one isn't available to Landlord Law members, although I talk about some of the things in the Rent Arrears action plan. So yeah.
That's all really, really helpful advice. And especially with all the stuff on landlord law as well. I know a lot of landlords will find that a really, really helpful resource. And of course, sometimes what happens is that sometimes a landlord does have to evict a tenant.
Yeah.
As we were saying, that doesn't a landlord never wants to evict a good tenant.
No. No.
Exactly. But sometimes, unfortunately, tenant eviction does happen, and the court process can sometimes be a little bit tricky to navigate. So
Yeah, telling me about.
can you just explain a little bit about how to sort of navigate the court process? And I mean, what are some of the common mistakes as well that you see when it comes to the eviction process as well from landlords?
Well, I don't do eviction work anymore. I used to when I had the solicitor's practice, but when I closed that down, I stopped doing eviction work, which I was actually quite pleased to do. But I drafted up an eviction guide, which is part of Landlord Law now, which does actually guide landlords through the process. And I've recently added a new section, guide to landlords who want to evict using Ground 1, section 8. But I think the most important thing for landlords to do, I mean, first of all, you need to be compliant with the law. If you haven't complied with the various rules, this is going to impact on your ability to evict. So, if you haven't complied with the deposit rules, then, the tenants can claim the penalty if you evict on the basis of rent arrears, and it will prevent you bringing a claim under section 21 until you've sorted it. So you need to be compliant with the legislation. The second thing is you need to research before you start your proceedings to make sure that you're using the correct procedure for your situation, because it's depending on, I mean, most tenancy types are assured short hold tenancies, but you may not be able to use section 21. It may be better for you to use another procedure. And we do have a guide for this on Landlord Law, and this is actually a free guide. In fact, I've got 2 free guides that will be helpful for landlords in this situation, and they are linked from the home page of Landlord Law. If you scroll down, there's links to them. One of them is called the Tenancy Trail. Most landlords will know what their tenancy type is, but if you're not sure, if there's any uncertainty, you can just follow that. It's sort of like a question and answer thing. So it asks questions and then you click yes or no, and then it leads you through to the correct answer. And the other free guide is called the Which Possession Proceedings Guide. And this takes you through by question and answer to lead you to the most appropriate proceedings for possession for your situation. And that's quite helpful. And I would suggest that landlords follow the Which Possession Proceedings Guide before issuing proceedings, just to check that they are compliant and that they're using the right process. Because if you use the wrong process, your case is going to be kicked out by the judge. And also, if your tenants have incurred legal costs, the judge may order you to pay your tenants' legal costs. And this is a real risk for landlords in using the wrong procedure. So and of course, it takes a very long time. I mean, since COVID, I don't know, because I don't do eviction work myself anymore, so I haven't seen, but I understand that the court process still takes a very long time. I mean, you're going to be very lucky if you get a possession order within 6 months. It probably something between 6 months and a year. So you really don't want to start the wrong process, because then it's going to be kicked out. You're going to be ordered to pay your tenant's costs. Then you have to start again, which is going to delay everything. So yeah, so what I'd say is make sure that you're compliant with all the rules, and that you do research before you start your claim, so you know that you're using the best procedure for you. And if you're not sure, if you're not familiar, we do have a guide on landlord law, but you may be better using solicitors if you've got a slightly unusual situation or a slightly complex situation. It's probably best to use a decent firm that understands this work, because you don't want to go to the solicitors who did your divorce or did your personal injury claim, because landlord and tenant work is a bit of a niche area. So you want to go to a firm that really understands and does this work. And a good sign to watch out for is that they do fixed fees. Landlord Action are a company that specialise in this, and they are a really good company to go to, because they don't really do anything else other than eviction work. So if you're not sure where to go, Landlord Action is a good place to go, and they have a national service. But there are other good firms as well. I mean, I work a lot with David Smith, solicitor at JMW Solicitors. They do eviction work, and also Anthony Gold, who I work with, they also do eviction work. So if you go to a firm like those, you should be safe, and they will look after you and do it properly. And although it will cost you, it's a lot better than getting it wrong, having to pay your tenant's cost and having everything delayed about 6 months. So yeah, do your research before you start. That's what I'd say.
Exactly, all really helpful advice there. And as you were touching on there, there's a massive court backlog at the moment. And of course, we were talking, I know you were touching on a little bit earlier as well, about the Renters Reform Bill. So I'd be really interested to hear your view, because you're a solicitor, what are your views on the Renters Reform Bill?
Well, my main view at the moment is that the general uncertainty and delay is causing problems in itself. In fact, I've just written a post for my Landlord Law blog on that, because one of the things that businesses need is certainty. And at the moment, we don't have certainty. We have the Renters Reform Bill, and we know more or less what's in it, but it hasn't received the royal assent yet. It hasn't finished going through the House of Lords. Bills can change. I mean, for example, the tenancy deposit regime was a very late amendment to the Housing Act 2004. And for most of the passage of the Housing Act 2004, we didn't know that was going to happen. So we don't have certainty. We don't have certainty because we don't know for sure what's going to be in the Renters Reform Bill and how it's going to be amended. And we also don't know whether it's going to go through at all. I mean, it's likely that the general election will be in October or November, but they could call an election in the summer. And if they do that, it's unlikely that they're going to be able to get the bill through in time, and then it'll fail completely, because if a bill doesn't become law before a general election, then it's lost. And then the new government have to start again. And we don't really know what the Labour Party want to do. I mean, we know they want to get rid of Section 21, and we've got some ideas about what they want to do from what they've said at the various report stages of the Renters Reform Bill. But you know, they've had their missions, and they've had their, what is it, their first steps. Not, we don't call them pledges, do we? They're something else. But they don't really mention what they're going to do with housing. So that's another uncertainty, which is actually freaking landlords out, because you know, they just don't know what's going to happen. And that's why a lot of landlords are selling up, which is a shame, because you know, they may do financially better if they were to hang on to it. I don't know. But it's also very bad for the country, because the private rented sector is the only place a lot of people can be housed. If there's very little social housing, and you know, to buy a property is very expensive. So I think the sooner they resolve it, the better, really, so people know where they stand.
Exactly, and as you were talking about there, there's a lot of uncertainty, and we actually need good landlords to stay in the sector, because it's so vitally important that we have good landlords in the sector.
Well, a lot of I mean, There's all this talk about rogue landlords. I mean, rogue landlords are a very small proportion. Most landlords are decent landlords. A lot of the landlords that I work with, they're really proud of their properties and keeping them in good condition, and they're absolutely devastated when tenants trash them, which some not often. Most landlords are decent, most tenants are decent, but there are a few bad landlords, of course, and there are a few bad tenants. There's bad apples in every sphere of life. So yeah, it is worrying.
It is a very worrying time indeed. Well, Tessa, I'm going to have to end it there, I'm afraid. I could talk like for another hour, I think. But thank you so much again for joining me today. Really appreciate it. And for those landlords out there, please go to Landlord Law because it's such a helpful resource in these really worrying times. Thank you so much again, Tessa. Really appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you.